In 23 years of animal rescue, I've never seen a mother do what Luna did that December morning. The emergency call came at 5:47 a.m. on Christmas Eve, reports of howling from the abandoned Johnson Warehouse district. When I found her, the German Shepherd was nothing but skin and bones, ribs jutting through matted fur like prison bars. But there she was, her skeletal body curved into a perfect shield around 3 tiny puppies, protecting them from the 18-degree F blizzard that had been raging for days. Luna hadn't moved from that spot in weeks. The snow had drifted 3 feet high around her makeshift den, but those babies were warm and alive. She was dying to keep them breathing. What I found in that old police coat pocket beneath her would change everything. I thought I knew about love, sacrifice, and the hidden wounds that destroy good people. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. 3 weeks earlier, Pine Ridge, Colorado was bracing for what meteorologists called the storm of the century. Our small town, nestled in the shadow of the Rockies just outside Denver, had seen hard times before, but this winter felt different. Meaner. The kind of cold that seeps into your bones and stays there. I'm Sarah Mitchell, 54 years old, and I've been running Rocky Mountain Animal Rescue since my husband Tom died in Afghanistan 8 years ago. Tom always said I had a gift for seeing the good in broken things, animals, people, situations that others had given up on. Maybe that's why I couldn't turn away from the emergency calls, even when our shelter was bursting at the seams and the foreclosure notice sat on my desk like a death sentence. The shelter was hemorrhaging money. Budget cuts had slashed our city funding by 60%, and donations had dried up as families struggled with their own financial crises. We had until January 1st to come up with $30,000, or the bank would take the building that had been my life's work. Every night, I fell asleep to the sound of 47 dogs and cats who depended on me, knowing I might fail them all. My father-in-law, Frank, a 78-year-old Korean War veteran with arthritis in his hands but steel in his spine, had been my anchor through it all. Sometimes God puts the right person in the right place, he'd tell me when I wanted to give up. Your job isn't to save them all, Sarah. Your job is to be there when it matters. Dr. Eleanor Thompson, who'd been the town's veterinarian for 40 years, was another constant. At 67, she should have retired, but Ellie said the animals still needed her. She'd been treating our rescues for free since Tom died, never sending a bill, never asking for recognition. Her weathered hands had saved more lives than I could count. Luna's story began in those final days of November, though I didn't know it then. She was 4 years old, a former K-9 police officer with the Pine Ridge Police Department. Her handler was Bobby Harrison, 38 years old, a decorated officer who'd been forced to retire after a PTSD episode during a school shooting response. Luna had taken a bullet meant for a classroom of second graders, earning her the Medal of Courage and Bobby a commendation for bravery. But medals don't pay for therapy, and commendations don't cure nightmares. Bobby lost his pension when the department deemed him unfit for duty. The man who'd spent 12 years protecting our community couldn't afford his medication and Luna's food. Some choices aren't really choices at all. They're just different kinds of breaking. The blizzard that would define that December had been building for days, temperatures dropping to record lows. Local news warned residents to stock up on supplies and keep pets indoors. And what they couldn't warn us about was how desperation makes people do impossible things, how love sometimes looks like letting go. December 2nd dawned gray and bitter, the kind of morning that makes you question why anyone chooses to live in Colorado. Bobby Harrison sat at his kitchen table, staring at the pile of bills that had grown like a malignant tumor over the past 3 months. Rent, past due. Electric, final notice. His prescription for Zoloft, $68 he didn't have. Luna's premium dog food, $42 that might as well have been $400. The mathematics of desperation are simple and cruel. Bobby had exactly $37 in his checking account. His disability check wouldn't come for another 2 weeks, and his landlord had already left 3 messages about eviction proceedings. He could buy his medication or Luna's food, but not both. The choice was killing him slowly, one sleepless night at a time. Luna lay beside his chair, her intelligent brown eyes watching his every movement. She'd been doing that more often lately, studying him with the same intensity she'd once reserved for tracking suspects. German shepherds are intuitive creatures, and Luna had always been exceptional, even among her breed. She could sense the darkness growing inside him like cancer. The PTSD had started after the Riverside Elementary incident 6 months ago. A disgruntled former employee had entered the school with a hunting rifle and 2 handguns, intent on teaching them all a lesson. Bobby and Luna had been first on scene. While other officers secured the perimeter, Bobby had gone in alone, Luna at his side. They'd found the gunman in a second-grade classroom, 23 7-year-olds huddled behind their teacher's desk. Luna had moved without command, a 90-pound missile of muscle and training. The gunman's rifle had swung toward the children, but Luna hit him mid-chest, driving him backward. The shot went wide, the bullet meant for a child's head, catching Luna in the shoulder instead. She'd held the man down until backup arrived, her blood pooling on the cheerful alphabet carpet while children cried and sirens wailed outside. The local newspaper called it heroic. The mayor gave speeches about bravery and service. Luna received her medal at a ceremony Bobby couldn't remember attending. But what Bobby remembered, what played on an endless loop in his nightmares, was the sound of that rifle cocking and the moment he'd frozen. For 3 crucial seconds, he'd been paralyzed by fear while Luna acted on pure instinct to save lives. Those 3 seconds had cost him everything. Not because anyone blamed him. The department psychologist said his response was normal, human, understandable. But Bobby knew the truth. When it mattered most, he'd failed. Luna had been the hero. He'd been the coward. The breaking point came that morning when Luna accidentally knocked over his display case during one of his episodes. Bobby had been reliving the shooting again, trapped in a waking nightmare where he could smell the gunpowder and hear the children screaming. Luna had tried to comfort him, nudging against his leg like she'd been trained to do, but her movement had sent his Purple Heart and commendations crashing to the floor. Glass scattered across the linoleum like shattered promises. Bobby stared at the medals. Meaningless pieces of metal that couldn't buy food or pay rent or stop the voices in his head that whispered, failure, every waking moment. Luna whimpered and tried to lick his face, but for the first time in their partnership, her touch felt like accusation. I can't do this anymore, he whispered to the empty apartment. I can't take care of you. I'm poison to everything I touch. The decision formed slowly, like ice crystallizing in his chest. Luna deserved better than watching him deteriorate. She deserved someone who could feed her properly, care for her medical needs, give her the life a hero earned. Bobby had been researching shelters for weeks, but every facility was overcrowded. Luna would end up in a cage, waiting for an adoption that might never come. But the abandoned Johnson warehouse sat empty on the edge of town, weatherproof and secluded. If he left her there with supplies, someone would eventually find her. Luna was too valuable, too well trained to be ignored. Some family would take her in, love her the way she deserved. Bobby loaded his truck with Luna's remaining food, her favorite blanket from their patrol car, and his old police coat, the one that still smelled like their partnership, back when he'd been worth something. Luna jumped into the passenger seat eagerly, thinking they were going for a ride. She always loved car trips. The drive to the warehouse took 12 minutes. Luna pressed her nose against the window, watching the familiar streets of Pine Ridge pass by. She had no way of knowing this would be their last patrol together. No understanding that love sometimes meant letting go of everything you couldn't bear to lose. Bobby's hands shook as he parked outside the warehouse, the weight of his decision settling on his shoulders like a burial shroud. The warehouse stood like a monument to Pine Ridge's better days, when the Johnson Dog Food Company employed half the town and prosperity seemed as permanent as the mountains. Now its broken windows stared blindly at the December sky, and weeds pushed through cracks in the loading dock where delivery trucks once rumbled with purpose. Bobby killed the engine and sat in silence, listening to Luna's excited panting in the passenger seat. She thought this was an adventure, another call to serve and protect. Her tail thumped against the worn upholstery, and she gave him that look, the one that said she trusted him completely, unconditionally, the way only dogs can trust. "Come on, girl," he whispered, his voice cracking like ice on a pond. Luna bounded out of the truck, immediately putting her nose to work. The warehouse held 1,000 scents, rust and neglect, small animals seeking shelter, the lingering ghost of machinery that had been silent for years. She moved with professional efficiency, checking corners and shadows, ensuring their temporary post was secure. Always working, always protecting, even when there was nothing left to protect. Bobby forced himself to walk to the loading dock, Luna's bag of food heavy in his hands. Each step felt like walking to his own execution. The warehouse doors had been chained shut, but time and weather had loosened the boards covering a side window. He pried them aside, creating an opening large enough for Luna to enter and exit. Inside, pale winter light filtered through dirty skylights, illuminating a space that had once hummed with life. Concrete floors stretched endlessly, broken only by support pillars and the skeletal remains of conveyor belts. It was dry, mostly windproof, and large enough for Luna to move around. It would have to be enough. He spread her patrol car blanket in a corner where two walls met, creating a windbreak. The blanket still smelled like their partnership, coffee from long night shifts, leather from their gear, and something indefinably warm that was just Luna. Bobby knelt beside it, and Luna immediately settled next to him, pressing her solid warmth against his leg. "You're going to be okay," he told her, stroking her ears. "Someone will find you, someone better than me." Luna tilted her head, reading his tone if not his words. Dogs understand goodbye long before humans say it. Her brown eyes searched his face with an intelligence that made his chest tighten. She knew something was wrong. Bobby pulled out his old police coat, the one he'd worn during their first patrol together, when Luna was young and eager, and he still believed he could make a difference. He folded it carefully and placed it beside the blanket. In the inside pocket, he left his badge and commendation letter, along with something else. A handwritten note on department letterhead. "To whoever finds Luna, her name is Luna, badge number K9007, Pine Ridge Police Department. She's a hero. She saved 23 children and took a bullet doing it. She deserves better than what I can give her. Please find her a family who can love her the way she deserves. I failed everyone who counted on me, but don't let her pay for my failures. There's $30 in the other pocket for food. I'm sorry it's not more. I'm sorry for everything. Officer Robert Harrison, badge number 247. He'd written it 3 times before getting the words right, though nothing could make this right. The bag of food would last maybe a week if Luna rationed it, which she would. She'd been trained in resource management during search and rescue operations. She would make it stretch, waiting for rescue that might never come. The thought made Bobby's stomach twist with self-loathing. Luna watched him arrange her meager supplies with growing anxiety. When he stood to leave, she stood too, following him toward the window. Her training told her to stay with her partner, but something deeper. Intuition, maybe? Or the kind of love that transcends commands. Told her this was different. At the window, Bobby turned back. Luna sat perfectly, tail still, eyes locked on his face. Even now, even abandoned in a cold warehouse with nothing but scraps, she maintained her dignity. She was still his partner, still ready to follow orders, still trusting him to do the right thing. "Stay," Bobby commanded, his voice barely above a whisper. Luna's ears flicked, but she remained seated. She would stay until released or until hunger drove her to forage. She would wait because waiting was what partners did. Bobby climbed through the window without looking back. If he saw her face again, he might lose what little resolve he had left. Outside, his truck engine turned over with mechanical indifference. He put it in reverse, backing away from the warehouse and everything he was abandoning. But Luna's sharp bark cut through the engine noise, and Bobby made the mistake of looking in his rearview mirror. She was at the window, front paws up on the sill, watching his truck disappear. Not following, she'd been told to stay, but watching with the patient loyalty of a creature who believed in second chances, even when first chances had failed spectacularly. Bobby drove 3 blocks before pulling over to vomit behind a dumpster, his body rejecting what his mind had forced him to do. Luna's face in that window would haunt him for the rest of his life. However long that might be, what Bobby didn't know, couldn't know, was that Luna was already pregnant, 8 weeks along with her first litter. The father was a neighbor's German shepherd who'd escaped his yard one afternoon in September. Luna had hidden her condition well, her thick winter coat disguising the subtle changes in her body. She would give birth alone in that warehouse, in the darkest weeks of winter, with nothing but instinct and love to guide her through labor. She would deliver 3 healthy puppies on Bobby's old coat, the scent of their partnership her only comfort during the longest night of her life. And she would wait as she'd been commanded, believing that orders meant something, that partnership was forever, that good people kept their promises even when the world went dark. The call came at 5:47 a.m. on December 23rd, jarring me from the first decent sleep I'd had in weeks. My phone buzzed against the nightstand like an angry wasp, displaying a number I didn't recognize. "Rocky Mountain Animal Rescue. This is Sarah." My voice came out rough with sleep and worry. "Ma'am, this is dispatch. We've got reports of howling coming from the warehouse district on Industrial Road. Neighbors say it's been going on for hours. Animal control is tied up with the storm damage, so they asked us to call you." I glanced at my alarm clock, then at the window where snow was still falling in thick, relentless sheets. The blizzard had been pummeling Pine Ridge for 3 days straight, and the temperature had dropped to 18 below zero, cold enough to kill. Any animal stuck outside in this weather wouldn't last long. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, I said, already reaching for my clothes. Frank was awake when I padded to the kitchen, sitting at the table with his coffee and the morning paper he couldn't actually read anymore. At 78, his eyes were failing, but his hearing remained sharp enough to catch my whispered phone conversation. "Animal emergency?" he asked without looking up. "Warehouse district. Probably some poor cat got trapped when the storm hit." I pulled on my heavy boots, the ones with steel toes that had seen me through 1,000 rescues. "I shouldn't be long." Frank folded his paper with deliberate precision. "In this weather, take the truck, not that little car of yours. And Sarah?" He fixed me with those pale blue eyes that had seen too much war and loss. "Sometimes God puts the right person in the right place. Don't second-guess yourself out there." The drive to Industrial Road took 30 minutes instead of my promised 20. The snowplows had given up trying to keep the secondary roads clear, and my truck crawled through drifts that reached halfway up the doors. The warehouse district looked like a scene from a post-apocalyptic movie. Abandoned buildings hulking against the gray sky, their broken windows like dead eyes staring at nothing. I found the Johnson warehouse by following the sound. Even through my truck's windows and the howling wind, I could hear it, a deep, mournful howling that spoke of grief too large for words. It wasn't the yipping of a lost cat or the frustrated barking of a confused dog. This was something primal, something that reached into my chest and squeezed. The warehouse sat at the end of a dead-end street, surrounded by snowdrifts that looked like frozen waves. I parked as close as I could and grabbed my emergency kit, blankets, a leash, tranquilizer gun if needed, and the bag of treats that had won over more frightened animals than I could count. The howling stopped as soon as I stepped out of my truck. In the sudden silence, I could hear my own breathing and the distant rumble of snowplows on the main road. Something was watching me. I followed tracks in the snow, not paw prints, but drag marks and disturbances that suggested an animal moving back and forth along the same path. The trail led to a side window where boards had been pried away, creating an opening large enough for a large dog to squeeze through. "Hey there," I called softly. "I'm not going to hurt you. I'm here to help." No response, but I could feel eyes on me. I'd learned to trust that sensation over the years. Frightened animals often watched rescuers for long minutes before deciding whether to trust or run. I knelt in the snow beside the window, my knees immediately soaking through my jeans. The opening was about 3 feet off the ground, too high for me to see inside without climbing. But as I leaned closer, I caught a scent that made my heart sink. The metallic smell of blood mixed with something else, something that spoke of birth and new life. "Oh, sweetheart," I whispered. "What's happening in there?" I pulled out my phone and turned on the flashlight app, angling the beam through the window. What I saw made me gasp. A German shepherd lay in the far corner, her body curled protectively around 3 tiny forms. Even from a distance I could see her ribs jutting through her coat like prison bars. Her head was up, alert, watching me with intelligent brown eyes that held wariness and desperation in equal measure. She was dying. That much was obvious from her skeletal frame and the way she held herself, conserving every ounce of energy, moving only when necessary. But those 3 puppies nestled against her belly were moving, warm and alive despite the brutal cold. "Jesus," I breathed. "How long have you been in there, girl?" The dog's ears flicked at my voice, but she didn't move. Her position was strategic, body angled to block the worst of the wind coming through gaps in the building, puppies tucked against her warmth, head positioned to watch all possible entrances. Even starving, even dying, she was still protecting them. I needed to get inside, but the moment I moved toward the window, the German shepherd's lips pulled back slightly. Not a full snarl, but a warning. She'd allow me to look, but coming closer was going to be a negotiation. "I know you're scared," I said, keeping my voice low and calm. "But I can help you. All of you." I reached slowly into my kit and pulled out a piece of dried chicken, holding it where she could see. Her nostrils flared, and I saw her throat work as she swallowed. When had she last eaten? Days, weeks. But she didn't move toward the food. Instead, she looked down at her puppies, then back at me. The message was clear. Feed them first. It took me 20 minutes to squeeze through that window, moving inch by careful inch while the German shepherd watched my every movement. She allowed me to enter her space, but her body language made it clear that any sudden movement toward her babies would end badly for both of us. Up close, her condition was even worse than I'd feared. Her coat was matted and dirty, her eyes slightly sunken with dehydration. But those puppies, they were plump and healthy, their coats clean. She'd been grooming them, nursing them, keeping them alive even as her own body consumed itself. I sat on the concrete floor about 6 feet away and set the piece of chicken on the ground between us. The German shepherd looked at it with the intensity of someone who'd forgotten what food tasted like, but she didn't move. "For you," I said softly. "You've earned it." She shook her head once deliberately, then looked down at her puppies. I understood. In her mind, they came first. They would always come first. I pulled out more chicken, breaking it into small pieces. Okay, how about this? Some for them when they're old enough, and some for you now. Deal? I placed 3 pieces closer to her, then retreated to my original position. After a long moment, she stretched her neck and took 1 piece, chewing carefully. The act of eating seemed to cost her tremendous effort, but she managed to swallow. That's when I saw the old police coat folded beneath her makeshift den. The fabric was worn and faded, but I could make out the Pine Ridge Police Department patch on the sleeve. My heart sank as understanding dawned. This wasn't a stray. This was someone's partner, abandoned when times got tough. I pulled out my phone to call Dr. Thompson, but the German Shepherd's low growl stopped me. She'd seen the phone, and something about the electronic device had triggered her anxiety. I put it away slowly. "It's okay," I murmured. "No phones. Just us." I stayed with her for another hour, offering small pieces of food and talking in low, soothing tones. She ate slowly, carefully, never taking her eyes off me for more than a few seconds. Gradually, her posture relaxed slightly. Not trust exactly, but acknowledgement that I wasn't an immediate threat. The puppies were beautiful, 2 males and a female, maybe 8 weeks old. The smallest, a male with white markings on his chest, was noticeably smaller than his siblings. He nursed weakly while his brother and sister competed for the best positions. As I watched this emaciated mother struggle to feed her babies, my phone buzzed with a text from Frank. "Everything okay? It's been 2 hours. 2 hours. I'd been sitting on a freezing concrete floor for 2 hours and it felt like minutes, but the German Shepherd had started to relax around me, and I didn't want to break that fragile trust by leaving. I texted back, "Found her. German Shepherd with puppies. Bringing them in." Frank's response was immediate. "Need help?" I looked at the dog, watching me with those intelligent, wary eyes. She'd allowed me into her space, accepted my food, but touching her puppies was going to be another negotiation entirely. "Not yet," I texted, working on trust. It took another hour before she allowed me to approach the puppies. The breakthrough came when the smallest one started crying, a thin, weak sound that spoke of hunger and cold. The mother tried to nudge him toward her nipple, but he was too weak to latch properly. Without thinking, I scooted closer. "Let me help him, sweetheart." The German Shepherd went rigid, but she didn't growl. I moved slowly, telegraphing every intention, until I could gently guide the puppy to a better position. He latched immediately, his tiny tail wagging with relief. The mother watched this interaction intently, and something shifted in her expression. Not full trust, but recognition that I was trying to help her babies. When I carefully touched the puppy's head with 1 finger, she didn't object. "Good mama," I whispered. "You're such a good mama." That's when I noticed the edge of paper sticking out from under the police coat. I pointed to it questioningly, and after a moment's hesitation, the German Shepherd shifted slightly, allowing me to see what was hidden beneath her bed. A police badge, a commendation letter, and a handwritten note that made my heart break into 1,000 pieces. As I read Bobby Harrison's confession, his desperate apology, his promise that this dog was a hero, I understood what I was really looking at. This wasn't abandonment. This was sacrifice. A broken man's attempt to save the one thing he loved most, even if it meant destroying himself in the process. The German Shepherd, Luna, according to the note, watched me read with an expression that seemed almost human in its complexity. She knew what that paper said. She understood betrayal and love and the terrible choices that desperate people make. "Oh, Luna," I whispered, tears freezing on my cheeks. "He didn't want to leave you. He thought he was saving you." Luna's tail moved slightly. Not a wag exactly, but acknowledgement. She'd been waiting here for 3 weeks, growing weaker every day, but still believing that her partner would return. Still hoping that orders meant something, that loyalty was reciprocal, that love was stronger than desperation. But hope was running out, and we both knew it. Luna had maybe days left, possibly hours. Her body was consuming itself to feed those puppies, and even maternal determination had limits. I pulled out my phone again, moving slowly so Luna could see what I was doing. This time, she didn't growl. "Dr. Thompson, it's Sarah. I need you at the shelter right away. Emergency transport. And doctor, bring everything. We're going to need a miracle." Getting Luna and her puppies to the shelter became a 3-hour ordeal that tested every skill I'd learned in 23 years of animal rescue. Luna's condition was so fragile that each movement seemed to cause her pain, but her maternal instincts wouldn't allow her to abandon the puppies for even a moment. Dr. Thompson arrived at the warehouse with her emergency kit and a portable stretcher designed for large dogs. "Dear God," Ellie whispered when she saw Luna through the window. At 67, she'd seen thousands of animals in distress, but something about Luna's determined protection of her babies while starving to death hit her hard. "How is she still conscious?" "Pure will," I said, helping Ellie through the window opening. "She won't let herself die until she knows they're safe." Luna watched our every movement as we set up the stretcher. Her breathing was shallow and labored, but her eyes remained alert. When Dr. Thompson approached with a stethoscope, Luna's lips pulled back in warning. She'd allow me near the puppies now, but this stranger was a different threat entirely. "Luna," I said softly, using her name for the first time. Her ears perked immediately. She knew that name, had been waiting to hear it. "This is Dr. Thompson. She's going to help you feel better." I don't know if Luna understood the words or just the tone, but she allowed Ellie to examine her. The prognosis was grim. Luna's heart rate was elevated and thready, her temperature below normal, and her dehydration severe. Most concerning was her weight. She'd lost at least 30 pounds from her normal 85. "We need to get her on IV fluids immediately," Dr. Thompson said, preparing a catheter. "But I'm worried about moving her. She's so weak that the stress of transport could trigger cardiac arrest." That's when Luna made the decision for us. She looked directly at me, then down at her puppies, then back at me. Slowly, deliberately, she picked up the smallest puppy, the one I'd helped nurse earlier, and placed him at my feet. Then she picked up the second puppy and did the same. Finally, she took the largest puppy, a female with Luna's intelligent eyes, and gently set her beside her brothers. The message was unmistakable. "Take them." "She's giving them to us," I whispered, tears blurring my vision. "She trusts us to save them." Luna then did something that broke my heart completely. She struggled to her feet, swaying with weakness, and walked to the stretcher. She lay down on it without being asked, placing her head on her paws and closing her eyes. She was ready to go, ready to trust us with her life and the lives of her babies. The transport to the shelter took 20 minutes through snow-clogged streets. Luna remained conscious but motionless on the stretcher, while I held the 3 puppies against my chest for warmth. They were surprisingly healthy, considering their mother's condition, testament to Luna's sacrifice. She'd given them everything she had, down to her last reserves of strength. Frank was waiting when we arrived, along with Jenny Morrison, my part-time assistant who'd driven through the blizzard to help. They'd prepared our medical bay with heating lamps, IV equipment, and emergency medications. The sight of Luna on that stretcher hit Frank particularly hard. He'd served with K9 units in Korea and understood the bond between handler and dog. "Military bearing," he murmured as we carried Luna inside. "Look at her spine, even now. This dog's got more discipline than most soldiers I knew." Dr. Thompson worked quickly to establish IV access while I settled the puppies in a heated enclosure. Luna watched everything through half-closed eyes, tracking our movements but conserving energy. The IV fluids would help, but her recovery depended on factors beyond medical intervention: will to live, trust in her new caregivers, and time we might not have. The smallest puppy, who I'd started calling Jake in my mind, was struggling more than his siblings. He was nursing weakly and seemed less responsive than the others. Dr. Thompson examined him carefully while Luna watched with obvious anxiety. "He's hypothermic and possibly hypoglycemic," Ellie said. "We need to get his body temperature up and his blood sugar stabilized. Without his mother's milk, he might not make it through the night." That pronouncement seemed to energize Luna. She lifted her head and whimpered softly, not in pain but in communication. She was trying to tell us something. She wants to nurse him, I realized. Even now, she's thinking about feeding them. We carefully positioned Jake where Luna could reach him, and despite her weakness, she began the gentle licking and nudging that stimulates nursing reflexes in puppies. Jake responded immediately, his tiny body warming against his mother's, his instincts guiding him to what he needed most. The sight of Luna's maternal care, despite her own dire condition, moved everyone in the room. Jenny wiped tears from her eyes as she adjusted the heating lamps. Frank stood quietly in the corner, his old soldier's facade cracking as he watched a mother's love transcend physical limitations. As the afternoon wore on, Luna's condition began to stabilize slightly. The IV fluids helped with her dehydration, and Dr. Thompson administered glucose to address her hypoglycemia, but she remained critically weak, and we all knew the next 24 hours would be crucial. That evening, I made the decision to post about Luna on our social media accounts. I'd been hesitant to publicize her story. It felt like exploiting her suffering for donations. But our shelter was still facing foreclosure, and Luna's medical bills were mounting rapidly. If her story could help save other animals while drawing attention to the issue of veteran PTSD and animal abandonment, maybe some good could come from this tragedy. The post was simple: a photo of Luna nursing her puppies with the text, "This is Luna, former canine police officer, Medal of Courage recipient, abandoned in a warehouse with 3 newborn puppies during the worst blizzard in Colorado history. She hasn't eaten in weeks but continues to nurse her babies. This is what unconditional love looks like. Please share Luna's story. She deserves to know that heroes are never forgotten." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within hours, the post had been shared thousands of times. Comments poured in from across the country. People sharing their own stories of pets who'd shown extraordinary devotion, veterans talking about their service dogs, families offering to adopt Luna and her puppies once they were healthy. But not all the responses were positive. Some people were outraged by what they saw as animal cruelty, demanding that whoever abandoned Luna be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. Others shared the post with angry commentary about irresponsible pet ownership and the need for stricter animal welfare laws. By midnight, Luna's story had been picked up by local news stations. My phone rang constantly with interview requests, and reporters began showing up at the shelter despite the ongoing blizzard. The attention was gratifying but also overwhelming. I'd never intended for Luna's private suffering to become a public spectacle. More concerning was a comment thread that had developed on our Facebook page. Someone had identified Bobby Harrison as Luna's former handler, and his personal information was being shared along with calls for his arrest. The tone was growing increasingly hostile, with people calling for everything from public shaming to violent retribution. Dr. Thompson stayed through the night to monitor Luna's condition. Around 3 a.m., Luna's breathing became labored and her heart rate spiked dangerously. For 30 terrifying minutes, we thought we might lose her. But as dawn broke on December 24th, Christmas Eve, Luna's vital signs stabilized again. "She's fighting," Dr. Thompson said, adjusting Luna's IV medication. "But she's running on fumes. Her body has been in starvation mode for too long. Even with treatment, her organs could start shutting down." That morning brought another development that changed everything. Frank was monitoring our social media accounts when he spotted a familiar truck parked across the street from the shelter. The same truck had been there the previous evening and the evening before that. "Sarah," Frank said quietly, "we've got a visitor. Blue Ford pickup, license plate starting with BCH. Same truck's been out there 3 times now." I looked through the window and saw him, a man in his late 30s, sitting alone in a truck that had seen better days. He was too far away to see clearly, but something about his posture spoke of desperation and indecision. He'd watch the shelter for 30 or 40 minutes, then drive away. "You think that's him?" I asked. "Bobby Harrison?" Frank nodded grimly. "Veteran's intuition. That man's carrying a heavy load. Question is, what's he planning to do with it?" The standoff continued through Christmas Eve morning. Bobby would arrive, sit in his truck watching our building, then leave when too many people came and went. I wanted to approach him to tell him that Luna was alive and fighting, but Frank advised caution. "Man's in a fragile state," Frank said. "Could go either way. Best to let him make the first move." Meanwhile, Luna's condition remained critical but stable. She was taking small amounts of water and had managed to eat a few pieces of soft chicken. The puppies were thriving under the heat lamps, their bodies warm and their bellies full. But Luna's eyes held a sadness that broke my heart. She was looking toward the door constantly, as if still waiting for someone who might never come. Christmas Eve afternoon brought a crisis that forced Bobby's hand. Christmas Eve afternoon brought the kind of crisis that turns hope into heartbreak in the space of a single heartbeat. I was in the medical bay checking on Luna when Jake, the smallest puppy, suddenly stopped nursing. His tiny body went limp in my hands, his breathing shallow and irregular. Luna immediately sensed something was wrong. She lifted her head with effort and began the anxious whimpering that every mother recognizes as distress. "Dr. Thompson!" I called, cradling Jake against my chest. His body felt cold despite the heat lamps, and his usual pink gums had turned pale gray. Ellie rushed over with her stethoscope, her weathered hands moving with practiced efficiency as she examined the puppy. What she found made her face go grim. "His heart rate is dropping rapidly, blood sugars crashing. Without intervention, we're going to lose him within the hour." Luna struggled to stand, her IV line pulling taut as she tried to reach her baby. The sound she made wasn't quite a whine or a howl. It was something more primal, the cry of a mother watching her child slip away. I'd heard that sound before from human mothers in hospital corridors, and it never got easier to witness. "What can we do?" I asked, though I already knew the answer from Dr. Thompson's expression. "Emergency glucose warming protocol, possible feeding tube," she said, preparing medications with quick, efficient movements. "But honestly, Sarah, his system is too immature, without round-the-clock intensive care that we don't have the equipment for." She didn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. Jake was dying, and there wasn't enough medicine or love in the world to stop it. That's when everything went wrong at once. Luna, despite her critical condition, somehow found the strength to stand and lunge toward her puppy. The sudden movement tore her IV catheter free, sending blood spraying across the floor. She collapsed immediately, but the damage was done. We'd lost our only way to keep her hydrated and medicated. Jenny rushed to help while I tried to comfort Jake, whose breathing was becoming more labored by the minute. Dr. Thompson worked frantically to reestablish IV access on Luna, but her veins were collapsed from dehydration, making it nearly impossible to find a good site. "I can't get it," Ellie said, her usually steady hands shaking with frustration. "Her vessels are too compromised." Outside, the media circus was growing. News vans lined the street despite the ongoing blizzard, and reporters were doing live broadcasts about Colorado's miracle Christmas dog. The irony was bitter. They were calling Luna a miracle while she lay dying on my examination table. Frank appeared in the doorway, his face pale. "Sarah, we've got a problem. That blue truck just pulled into our parking lot. The driver's getting out and he doesn't look stable." Through the window, I could see Bobby Harrison walking toward our building with the uncertain gait of a man at the end of his rope. His clothes were rumpled, his hair unkempt, and there was something in his posture that spoke of dangerous desperation. In his right hand, barely visible against his leg, was what looked like a gun. "Call the police," I told Frank quietly. "Already did. But in this weather, response time's going to be at least 20 minutes. Jenny grabbed my arm. "Sarah." Jake stopped breathing. I looked down at the tiny puppy in my hands. His chest was still, his body limp and cooling rapidly. For a moment, the room was silent, except for Luna's labored breathing and the sound of wind howling outside. Then Luna began to howl. It was a sound that raised every hair on my arms, a keening wail that spoke of loss too profound for words. Somehow she knew that her baby was gone, and the sound she made was grief personified. It was the cry of every mother who'd ever lost a child, distilled into pure animal anguish. That's when Bobby Harrison burst through our front door. He stood in the entryway like a man possessed, his eyes wild with panic and pain. The gun was clearly visible now, a police-issue Glock that shook in his trembling hand. Behind him, snow swirled through the open door, like a reminder of all the cold, cruel forces arrayed against us. "Where is she?" he demanded, his voice cracking with emotion. "Where's Luna?" Frank stepped forward, his old soldier's instincts taking over. "Son, put the weapon down. Nobody needs to get hurt here." "You don't understand," Bobby said, tears streaming down his face. "I've been watching the news. I've seen what people are saying about me. They're calling me a monster. They want me arrested, prosecuted, destroyed, but I never meant to hurt her. I thought I was saving her." Luna's howling continued from the medical bay, a sound so heartbroken that it seemed to tear at the fabric of reality itself. Bobby's face crumpled when he heard it. "That's her, isn't it? She's dying because of me." "She's not dying because of you," I said, stepping slowly toward him. "She's fighting because of you, because you taught her to be strong, to protect what matters." "I abandoned her," Bobby sobbed. "I left her to starve in the cold. What kind of partner does that? What kind of man leaves his dog to die?" Dr. Thompson emerged from the medical bay, her hands covered in blood from trying to save Jake. "The kind of man who's sick and didn't know where else to turn," she said quietly. "The kind of man who loved his partner so much, he was willing to destroy himself to save her." Bobby's gun hand wavered. "She's really alive?" "She's alive," I confirmed. "Critical condition, but alive. Fighting every minute to stay with her babies." "Just like she fought to stay with you?" That's when the second tragedy struck. Jenny's voice called from the medical bay. "Dr. Thompson, Luna's not responding. Her breathing's getting weaker." The combination of stress from losing Jake, the trauma of her torn IV, and months of starvation had pushed Luna's body beyond its limits. She was going into shock, her organs beginning to shut down one by one. Bobby heard the urgency in Jenny's voice. Without hesitation, he threw his gun aside and rushed toward the medical bay. All thoughts of suicide, all the despair and self-loathing that had brought him here with a weapon, evaporated in the face of Luna's immediate need. "Luna," he called as he entered the room. "Luna, I'm here." I'm sorry, girl. I'm so sorry. Luna's eyes opened when she heard his voice. Despite her critical condition, despite everything that had happened, her tail moved slightly against the examination table. Not a wag exactly, but recognition. Forgiveness, maybe. Or just the simple joy of a dog seeing her person again. Bobby knelt beside the table, placing his hand gently on Luna's head. "I thought I was poison," he whispered. "I thought you'd be better off without me. But I was wrong, wasn't I? We're supposed to be together." Luna's breathing steadied slightly at his touch. Not improvement, exactly, but the peace that comes from being with someone you love when everything else is falling apart. Dr. Thompson worked frantically to stabilize Luna while Bobby spoke to her in the low, calming tones he'd used during their years as partners. Outside, police sirens were finally approaching, their wailing mixing with the wind to create a symphony of crisis and chaos. "She needs surgery," Dr. Thompson said grimly. "Emergency procedure to address internal bleeding from the stress. But honestly, in her condition, the anesthesia alone could kill her." Bobby looked up with tears streaming down his face. "What are her chances?" "Without surgery, 0. With surgery, maybe 20%. The choice was impossible. Try to save her and risk killing her, or watch her die slowly from internal hemorrhaging. It was the kind of decision that breaks people, the kind of moment when love becomes a burden too heavy to bear. Bobby closed his eyes, his hand still resting on Luna's head. "What would she want?" he asked quietly. The answer came from Luna herself. Despite her weakness, despite the pain, she lifted her head slightly and looked directly at Bobby. Her message was clear. Trust your training. Make the hard choice. Save who you can save. "Do the surgery," Bobby said. As Dr. Thompson prepared for emergency surgery in our inadequate facilities, Bobby held Luna's head in his hands. "You fought for those babies," he whispered. "Now fight for yourself. Fight for us." Outside, the police were setting up a perimeter, unaware that the crisis had already passed. The real battle was happening on an examination table, where love and medicine would determine whether Christmas Eve brought salvation or final heartbreak. The emergency surgery took place on my examination table under portable surgical lights that Frank had rigged from his workshop equipment. Dr. Thompson worked with the focused intensity of someone performing a miracle with inadequate tools, while Bobby held Luna's paw and whispered reassurances that seemed to keep her heart beating through sheer force of will. What we discovered during surgery changed everything. "Sarah," Dr. Thompson said, her voice tight with concentration as she worked inside Luna's abdomen. "Look at this." Under the harsh lights, Luna's internal injuries told a story none of us had expected. Yes, there was damage from starvation and stress, but there was something else. Old trauma. Carefully healed scars that spoke of previous medical intervention. "Surgical clips," Dr. Thompson murmured, pointing to tiny metal markers barely visible in Luna's tissue. "Professional grade." This dog had major surgery before, probably emergency trauma repair. Bobby's face went white. "The school shooting," he whispered, "when she took the bullet meant for those kids. The emergency vet said she might have complications later, internal scarring that could cause problems down the road." The realization hit me like a physical blow. Luna's condition wasn't just from 3 weeks of abandonment. It was from months, maybe years, of her body trying to heal from trauma sustained in the line of duty. The bullet she'd taken for those children had been slowly killing her ever since. "She's been in pain this whole time," Bobby said, his voice breaking. "All those months when I thought she was fine, she was suffering because of that shooting." Dr. Thompson continued working, her experienced hands navigating around scar tissue and adhesions that had formed as Luna's body tried to heal itself. The starvation accelerated everything, she explained. Her body was already compromised, and then the stress of pregnancy, birth, and malnutrition pushed her over the edge. As the surgery progressed, more truths emerged. Luna's pregnancy hadn't been planned or supervised. She'd given birth alone in that warehouse, delivering 3 puppies by instinct while her own body was failing. The fact that she'd kept them alive for weeks while starving was beyond remarkable. It was miraculous. "Look at this," Dr. Thompson said, indicating Luna's mammary tissue. "She's been producing milk despite severe malnutrition. Her body was literally consuming itself to feed those babies." Bobby broke down completely at that revelation. The guilt he'd been carrying about abandoning Luna, about being a coward, about failing as a partner, was nothing compared to the realization that Luna had been sacrificing herself every single day since he'd left her. Outside the medical bay, I could hear police officers talking with Frank, their voices low and professional. Through the window, I saw news crews setting up despite the blizzard, drawn by reports of an armed man at the animal shelter. They had no idea they were witnessing something far more complex than a simple hostage situation. The surgery took 3 hours. 3 hours of delicate work to repair internal bleeding, remove scar tissue, and address complications that should have been treated months ago. Bobby never left Luna's side, his hand on her head, talking her through each critical moment. "Remember when we caught that bank robber?" he whispered, as Dr. Thompson worked. "You tracked him for 6 miles through that park. Never gave up, never stopped believing we'd find him. That's what you're doing now, girl. You're tracking your way back to us." Luna's vitals remained stable throughout the procedure, but just barely. Her blood pressure was critically low, her heart rate irregular, and her body temperature kept dropping despite the warming blankets. Every few minutes, the monitors would alarm, and Dr. Thompson would have to pause to address some new crisis. The worst moment came when Luna's heart stopped completely. The monitors went flat, emitting that terrible continuous tone that means life has left the building. Bobby's face went gray as Dr. Thompson immediately began chest compressions, her small hands working frantically to restart Luna's heart. "Come on," she muttered, pressing rhythmically on Luna's chest. "Come on, you stubborn dog. You've come too far to give up now." 30 seconds passed. A minute. The longest 90 seconds of my life. Then Luna's heart kicked back in, strong and steady, as if she'd simply been resting for a moment before continuing the fight. "That's my girl," Bobby sobbed, tears dripping onto Luna's fur. "That's my partner." Never quits, never gives up. Dr. Thompson closed the incision with careful, precise sutures, her hands steady despite the emotional intensity of the situation. As she worked, she began sharing what she'd really found inside Luna's body. "The bullet damage was worse than anyone realized," she explained. "There's been chronic inflammation for months, probably causing constant pain. No wonder Bobby was having trouble with her behavior. She was hurting all the time." This revelation reframed everything. Bobby's guilt about abandoning Luna was replaced by a different kind of anguish, the realization that he'd failed to recognize her pain, failed to get her the medical care she'd needed. "She never showed it," he said wonderingly. "Even when she must have been in agony, she kept working, kept protecting people. That's who she is." As Dr. Thompson finished the surgery, another truth emerged from the police investigation happening in our front office. Officer Martinez, who'd been Bobby's supervisor before the PTSD diagnosis, had arrived to handle the situation. What he told us changed the entire narrative that had been building around Luna's abandonment. "Bobby Harrison is one of the finest officers this department ever had," Officer Martinez told the assembled media. "He and Luna saved dozens of lives during their partnership. The fact that he's struggling with PTSD doesn't erase his service or his character." The officer went on to explain the department's failure to provide adequate mental health support for Bobby after the school shooting. Budget cuts had eliminated their employee assistance program just when Bobby needed it most. The man the internet was calling a monster was actually a victim of systemic failures that affected veterans and first responders across the country. "This isn't a story about animal cruelty," Officer Martinez said firmly. "This is a story about what happens when we fail to take care of the people who risk their lives to protect us." The media narrative began shifting immediately. Reporters who'd come expecting a clear-cut case of animal abuse found themselves confronting a much more complex story about PTSD, veterinary care, social services failures, and the price of heroism. But the most important revelation came from Luna herself. As she began to wake from anesthesia, Luna's first instinct was to look for her puppies. Her head turned weakly toward the sound of Bella and Scout playing in their enclosure. When she realized Jake was gone, somehow she knew immediately, she made a sound I'll never forget. Not grief exactly, but acceptance. The acknowledgement that sometimes love means letting go. Then she looked at Bobby, and something passed between them that transcended words. Recognition, yes, but also forgiveness. Luna understood, in whatever way dogs understand such things, that Bobby had been fighting his own battle for survival. She didn't blame him for the abandonment any more than he should have blamed himself for the PTSD. Dr. Thompson monitored Luna's recovery through the night, adjusting medications and watching for complications. Bobby refused to leave her side, sleeping in a chair beside her recovery kennel. Every few hours, Luna would wake and check on her remaining puppies, then look at Bobby as if reassuring herself he was real. The transformation in both of them was remarkable. Bobby's face had lost the haunted, desperate look he'd worn when he burst through our doors. Luna, despite her surgical trauma, seemed more peaceful than she had since I'd found her. They were healing each other simply by being together. Christmas morning brought the news that would change everything again. Dr. Thompson's examination revealed that Luna's surgery had been even more successful than hoped. Not only had they repaired the immediate damage, but removing the chronic scar tissue had eliminated a source of pain Luna had been living with for months. "She's going to be okay," Dr. Thompson announced, her voice thick with emotion. "Full recovery, with proper care and rehabilitation." Bobby collapsed in relief, his hands covering his face as years of guilt and fear finally found release. Luna, sensing his emotion, struggled to sit up in her kennel and pressed her nose against the bars where he could reach her. The moment they touched, Bobby's fingers through the kennel wire, Luna's nose wet and warm against his skin, I saw something beautiful happen. Two broken souls recognizing each other, choosing to heal together rather than suffer alone. Outside our windows, Christmas morning was dawning clear and bright for the first time in days. The blizzard had passed, leaving Pine Ridge buried in pristine snow that sparkled like hope made visible. But the real miracle was happening right here in our medical bay, where love had proven stronger than trauma, and forgiveness had opened the door to healing. 6 months later, on a warm June morning that felt like a gift after Colorado's brutal winter, I stood in the backyard of our expanded shelter watching Luna demonstrate basic obedience commands to a group of veterans participating in our new PTSD therapy program. Her coat gleamed in the sunshine, full and healthy, her weight restored to a robust 85 pounds. The surgical scar on her belly was barely visible beneath her thick fur, but more importantly, the pain that had haunted her for months was completely gone. "Luna, heal," Bobby commanded, his voice steady and confident in a way that would have been impossible 6 months ago. Luna immediately moved to his left side, her shoulder aligned with his leg, her intelligent eyes focused on his face with the kind of trust that only comes from shared healing. The group of veterans watched with rapt attention. There was Marcus, a Marine who'd lost his leg in Afghanistan and was struggling with survivor's guilt. Sarah Chen, an Army medic whose PTSD had cost her 2 jobs and a marriage. David Rodriguez, a Navy veteran who hadn't slept through the night in 3 years. All of them had come to our Second Chances program skeptical that a dog could help where medications and traditional therapy had failed. But Luna was teaching them something profound, that healing isn't about forgetting trauma, it's about learning to carry it differently. "Watch how she responds to my emotional state," Bobby explained to the group, deliberately allowing tension to creep into his posture. Luna immediately noticed the change, moving closer to his leg and looking up at his face with concern. "She's not trying to fix me or make the bad feelings go away. She's just letting me know I'm not alone with them." The program had been Dr. Thompson's idea, born from watching Bobby and Luna's recovery process. Traditional PTSD therapy focuses on individual healing, but Luna had shown us something different, that trauma could become a bridge to connection rather than a wall that isolated. When Bobby talked about his nightmares while Luna pressed against his leg, when Luna sought comfort during thunderstorms and Bobby provided it, they were both healing from their wounds while helping each other carry the scars. The media attention following Luna's Christmas Eve surgery had brought unexpected benefits. Donations poured in from across the country, not just money but offers of expertise, equipment, and volunteer time. A veterinary equipment company donated a complete surgical suite. A construction company offered to expand our facilities for free. Most importantly, mental health professionals reached out with offers to collaborate on innovative PTSD treatment approaches. Dr. Patricia Williams, a psychologist specializing in trauma therapy, had driven up from Denver every week for the past 3 months to help design our program. She'd been studying the connection between human and animal healing for decades, but Luna and Bobby's story offered something unique, a case study in mutual recovery that challenged traditional therapeutic models. "What we're seeing here," Dr. Williams explained to visiting reporters, "is that healing doesn't happen in isolation. Luna and Bobby are teaching each other that vulnerability isn't weakness, that asking for help is courage, that love sometimes means accepting imperfection." The success stories were mounting. Marcus had slept through the night for the first time in 2 years after spending a week learning to care for Bella, one of Luna's puppies who'd been returned to the shelter when her adoptive family moved overseas. Sarah Chen had reduced her anxiety medication by half after participating in Luna's training sessions. David Rodriguez had applied for his first job in months, listing his volunteer work with our therapy program as recent experience. But the most profound transformation had been in Bobby himself. The man who'd walked into our shelter 6 months ago with a gun and a suicide note had become someone I barely recognized. Gone was the hollow-eyed desperation, replaced by a quiet confidence that came from having purpose again. He'd completed intensive PTSD therapy at the VA hospital, but his real healing had happened here, working with Luna and learning to trust himself again. "I spent months thinking I was poison," Bobby told the veterans during a group session, "that everything I touched would be contaminated by my failures. But Luna taught me something different. She showed me that being wounded doesn't make you worthless. Sometimes the broken places are where the light gets in." Bobby had been officially hired as our PTSD program coordinator 3 months ago, using his law enforcement background and personal experience to design training protocols that addressed both human and animal trauma. His partnership with Luna had evolved too, no longer officer and K9, but something deeper. 2 souls who'd saved each other when traditional systems had failed them both. The shelter itself had been transformed by the influx of support. Our old, cramped facility had been expanded to include a dedicated medical wing, training areas for the therapy program, and comfortable housing for long-term residents. The foreclosure notice that had terrified me during those dark December days was now framed in my office as a reminder of how quickly desperation can become hope. Frank, at 79, had found new purpose as the shelter's unofficial historian and veteran liaison. His Korean War experience gave him instant credibility with program participants, and his dry humor had diffused more than one emotional crisis. He'd taken particular pride in creating a memorial garden for Jake, Luna's puppy who hadn't survived that terrible Christmas Eve. The small granite marker read simply, "Jake, born in darkness, died in love, remembered in light." Dr. Thompson, who should have retired years ago, had been energized by the challenge of developing innovative treatment approaches for trauma-related animal health issues. Her research on the connection between physical and emotional healing in working dogs was being published in veterinary journals and had attracted interest from universities across the country. But perhaps the most beautiful development had been the adoption of Scout and Bella, Luna's surviving puppies. Scout had been adopted by the Henderson family, Tom and Margaret, both teachers, with 2 young children who'd been asking for a puppy for years. Scout's intelligence and gentle nature made him perfect for their active household, and the children had learned valuable lessons about responsibility and empathy through caring for him. Bella had found her home with retired Marine Colonel James Murphy, whose wife had died the previous year. Murphy had initially resisted suggestions that a dog might help with his grief, but Bella's intuitive nature and playful spirit had gradually coaxed him out of his isolation. He brought her to shelter events regularly, and watching the gruff old Marine baby talk to his little princess never failed to make me smile. Both families had become part of our extended community, bringing Scout and Bella for regular visits with Luna. The reunions were joyful chaos, adult dogs and humans greeting each other with enthusiasm while Luna supervised her grown children with obvious pride. The ripple effects of Luna's story continued to spread in ways we hadn't anticipated. Luna's Law, legislation protecting veterans from prosecution during mental health crises, had been introduced in the Colorado State Legislature and was gaining bipartisan support. Similar programs were being developed in 15 other states, using our model as a template for combining animal rescue with veteran services. Most importantly, the stigma around PTSD and first responders was beginning to crack. Bobby's willingness to share his story publicly had encouraged other officers, firefighters, and emergency workers to seek help before their own situations became critical. The Pine Ridge Police Department had reinstated their Employee Assistance Program and was requiring annual mental health evaluations for all personnel. On this particular June morning, as I watched Luna work with her veterans, I reflected on the journey that had brought us all to this moment. 6 months ago, Luna had been dying in a warehouse, abandoned and forgotten. Bobby had been contemplating suicide, convinced he was worthless. Our shelter had been facing closure, and I'd been questioning whether all my years of rescue work had made any real difference. Now, Luna was saving lives in a completely different way, using her trauma as a bridge to healing rather than a wall to hide behind. Bobby had found his calling in helping other veterans navigate their own dark nights of the soul. Our shelter had become a model for innovative therapeutic programs that were attracting attention from around the world. But the real measure of success wasn't in the media coverage or the research papers or the legislative victories. It was in moments like this, watching Marcus laugh for the first time in months as Luna performed her play dead trick with theatrical flair, seeing Sarah Chen's shoulders relax as she brushed Luna's coat with meditative focus, observing David Rodriguez stand a little straighter as Luna looked to him for direction during training exercises. Luna had taught us all something profound about the nature of love and healing. She'd shown us that strength doesn't mean avoiding vulnerability, that courage isn't the absence of fear, but the decision to keep moving forward despite it. Most importantly, she'd demonstrated that healing happens in relationship. That the wounds we carry can become sources of connection rather than isolation if we're brave enough to let others see them. As the morning session ended and the veterans began to leave, each taking a moment to say goodbye to Luna with gentle pets and whispered words of gratitude, Bobby knelt beside his partner and scratched behind her ears in the way that always made her tail wag. "Good work today, girl," he murmured. "Ready to go home?" Home. The word that had seemed impossible 6 months ago now carried the weight of safety, belonging, and hope. Bobby and Luna shared a small apartment near the shelter, their lives intertwined in ways that honored both their professional partnership and their personal healing journey. As they walked toward Bobby's truck, Luna suddenly stopped and looked back at me. For a moment, our eyes met across the yard, and I swear I saw something like gratitude in her gaze. Not just for the rescue, not just for the medical care, but for believing that broken things could be beautiful, that second chances were sacred gifts, that love was always worth fighting for. "Thank you," I whispered, though I wasn't sure if I was talking to Luna, to Bobby, to the universe that had brought them both to our door on that terrible December morning, or to all the forces that had conspired to turn desperation into hope. Luna's tail wagged once, as if she understood, then she bounded toward the truck where Bobby was waiting. As they drove away, I could see her head out the passenger window, ears flapping in the breeze, looking like any happy dog heading home with her favorite person. But I knew better. I knew that behind that joy was a story of survival, sacrifice, and the kind of love that transcends understanding. Luna hadn't just been rescued. She'd become a rescuer, saving lives in ways that traditional therapy never could. And in a world that often felt broken beyond repair, that was everything. Sometimes the most beautiful stories begin in the darkest places. Luna's journey from that frozen warehouse to becoming a healer for wounded veterans reminds us that our greatest trials often become our most powerful gifts. Like many of you who've weathered life's storms, perhaps losing a spouse, watching adult children struggle, or facing your own health challenges, Luna discovered that surviving hardship doesn't diminish your worth. It deepens your capacity to help others heal. At 55, 65, or beyond, you might feel your best years are behind you. But Luna teaches us differently. She was 4 years old, scarred from taking a bullet for school children, abandoned by someone who loved her but couldn't care for her. Yet her story was just beginning. Her wounds became bridges to healing others. Her pain transformed into purpose. Your experiences, the heartaches, the losses, the moments you barely survived, aren't endings, they're qualifications. Like Luna, you carry wisdom that can only come from walking through darkness and choosing hope anyway. Your second chances aren't just for you. They're gifts you can offer to others still finding their way home. What moment in your life felt like an ending but became a new beginning? How has your pain become your purpose? Share your story below. Someone needs to hear that survival is possible.